Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, and this is going to be a fun week for gaming. We got Marvel Rivals coming out soon, and we have Path of Exile 2 entering early access very soon. This is one that I've been waiting to talk about because I'm watching all of this pre-launch coverage coming in, and I am getting a little hyped, y'all. You see, I grew up on action RPGs like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance and the Champion series, aka Return to Norrath, Return to Arms, and this was my jam as a kid. Like, these were the games I was obsessed with, and funny enough, as I got older, I fell out of the genre more. You know, I tried games like Torchlight 2, Diablo 3 was pretty solid, Diablo 4, I ran through the campaign, that was all right, but it never had its hooks in me quite like it did when I was a kid. And that's funny because, you know, back then you wouldn't have these games focused on Endgame unless you were like Diablo 2, you know, a Champions of Norrath or a Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. You kind of just ran through the story over and over. You tried a different class, and that was sort of where the replayability lied. And what's interesting is as I'm looking into Path of Exile 2 more and more, it seems to bring these two worlds together where the casual, if you will, which I think I identify more as, to be honest, and the hardcore player might be both getting just a ton of content here with Path of Exile 2. And as I go through everything that I learned through watching a bunch of previews, reading the news, watching what's on the Path of Exile YouTube channel, I think you'll be shocked at how much is being packed into this game for its early access launch compared to games you've seen nowadays. I was invited to an event for Path of Exile 2 twice now. It honestly just didn't line up well, whether it be, number one, I struggle to get out and travel a lot as I'm funding a video game because a lot of my money is going into that, and so the travel money is just not there, to be quite frank. But also, it just sometimes stars weren't aligning. Like in the case of June, I was invited to that event, and honestly, my flight got canceled. It just ended up not working out. So I've had my opportunities to get my hands on this game, but it all kind of, I guess, works out in the end because here we are talking about it, and it's looking really good, and it's coming out this year. And honestly, the developer did delay this release by a couple of months because they wanted to make sure things are right. And even though it was tough, they admitted like this is the right thing to do, which I think is going to earn a lot of goodwill for a lot of people. Another thing that I think people are really getting behind when it comes to Path of Exile 2 is the development team, right? You have the director in Jonathan Rogers, who's also one of the founders of Grinding Gear Games, the developer of Path of Exile, doing a lot of interviews, just giving a lot of information and just talking about how important it is to just make the game you want to play, and that game hopefully resonates with a lot of people. And I think we're seeing a lacking of that in AAA game development. It looks like this is the type of studio that's resonating with people. You see the same thing kind of happening with like Alarian Studios, right? Where you have these panels, you get to interact with developers a little bit more and just get to know them a bit better. And I think people connect with this a lot more because it just feels like a more human experience, right? It's not checking any corporate boxes. It's just about getting to know these developers, getting to know their game and why they want to make it. And I think people appreciate now more than ever that kind of authentic approach to game development of just wanting to make something cool, wanting to make something that moves you, whatever it may be, but wanting to make a thing and just doing it and hoping that it does connect with other people and not really forcing the point. So there's plenty of other interviews out there for you all to check out on this game that just have tons of information, but it's interesting to see just how in they're going in on marketing this game and just it's spreading like wildfire. You just look up Path of Exile 2. It's all over YouTube right now. Like everyone's talking about it. This is going to be one of the biggest games of the year, which is not quite what I anticipated when I saw the game first announced. No doubt I'll be playing it at launch. I'll have more thoughts on the game probably next week, but I just want to talk about, you know, as we do with this little video series we run here, some thoughts on what's going on with the game heading into its launch and just a little bit of a gut check before we actually get our hands on it and play it together. I was really drawn to this one as well because I saw so much positivity growing around it, and honestly, there's just been a lot of anger in the games industry, so I was like, oh, sweet, people are hyped about this. What's going on here? I also really enjoyed the first one. It was kind of cool to see people rallying around Path of Exile because I remember when I played the first one, I went, hey, this random download I did for a free-to-play title ain't too bad. Let's see what other people think, and it just felt like it was so deep into its lifespan that given the massive spanning skill tree that's there and just how much content's there, it was a tough game to catch up on. It was tough for newcomers to jump in. So I think Path of Exile 2, with how much of a quantum leap forward it is in a lot of ways, as I'll show here, combined with it being like a good starting point, has led to just a lot of people being excited about it. And in turn, I'm happy to see people are happy about Path of Exile. So just some quick need-to-know details. It's entering early access December 6th. It's going to be $30 to get into that. You'll also get like $30 of in-game currency, so it kind of equals out for you there. But this will be free to play at the 1.0 launch. There's going to be 6 playable classes at launch. Those classes are the Monk, Warrior, Ranger, Mercenary, Witch, and Sorceress. Each of them having 20 to 25 active skills per class. So there is a lot there. But on top of those classes, you're going to get another 6 at the 1.0 launch to a total of 12. The first 3 acts of the game are going to be available in this early access game. So that's about 30 to 40 hours of content according to a leaked review, with the full game having 6 acts in total. So you can basically maybe double that. And many people who have previewed this game, I haven't seen a negative preview yet, are claiming it's already in an incredible state and that this is just literally half the content that's going to be in the game up until its actual launch. I always remember when Path of Exile 2 was revealed, what got me really excited was just seeing the massive leap forward visually. You know, I had the same feeling, and I know you're not technically allowed to talk positively about Diablo 4, but again, casual speaking here, so pardon me for a moment. I just like that Diablo 4 took a moment to really focus on the visuals, the quality of the world space itself. I'm not talking about the end game and the many problems the game seems to have with its community right now, but just on a visual front, I like that they moved the presentation forward a little bit there. It's not, as someone who grew up with, again, games like Baldur's Gate, Dark Alliance, as well as Return to Arms and Return to Norrath, that's not really what you came to expect of those games. The stories were very throwaway, so I just like that that game tried to focus on it more. But here you look at Path of Exile 2, the animation quality, the texture quality, the VFX work, the lighting quality, it's all incredible looking. It's crisp, it's beautiful, and it's gritty. Like I saw in one of the bits of gameplay I was watching that when you're selecting your character at the beginning of the game, they're all on the gallows and everyone gets hung except for you. You see some really nasty creature design. You know, it's far grittier. It's that dark fantasy vibe that, you know, a lot of us have really been looking for a while, and I feel like this is leaning into that. But you go into the audio, very crunchy, very diabolical, the skill sounds, combine that with the animation. I mean, the animation does a lot of the heavy lifting here because it looks like, based on what we're seeing with previews and whatnot, that this game is a lot more difficult. There's actual boss patterns I'll talk about in a minute here. This is all important to note because overall, like, the game has a slower pace to it, it looks like, than your typical action RPG, which I really like. I didn't see like what I would experience in a Diablo game, for example, where, oh, here comes like 18 million enemies. You're just going to keep backing away, arm's distance, and just keep range attacking them over and over and over and kind of rinse and repeat that. It was very different here, where I saw like 5, 6 enemies appear and surround you, and I was watching players dodge roll, get out of the way, jump up in the air with this leaping slam. The VFX work, again, incredible. When they land, you see all of the dirt, the rocks, the smoke, the sparks, everything fly up from the ground. But those encounters looked a lot more intense, which I think is a little bit different for these more isometric action RPG style games. So yeah, visually speaking, audio-wise, I mean, this is the first thing I noticed at the gameplay reveal. I'm like, this is a major step forward from the first game. The first game I thought was respectable, but it was definitely just in line with what you'd expect for the genre. This looks like the true evolution that people have been waiting for, and it's striking at the right time, because again, I think a lot of the dissatisfaction with Diablo 4 is at an all-time high, and now you got this game coming along that people have been waiting for, and it's in early access. Like, it's the perfect gotcha moment for the action RPG genre, but it looks really damn good. And that's not even getting into the skill tree that Path of Exile is very well known for. I don't know if y'all have ever laid eyes on this thing, but that's what got me into the first Path of Exile. Like, I fired up and went, oh my god, holy smokes, how do you go through all this? And the build crafting has always been insane, and it looks like it will be just that again. There is a recommended list. I was watching Wolfheart FPS's preview, and he mentioned there is a recommended list. So if you look at this and go, dear God, looks cool, but no thank you, I get that. But you have this list here to kind of walk you through it, ease you into things. And again, this feels like the right time to try and get into it because, you know, if Path of Exile 1's anything to go by, there can get to a point where it's so overwhelming. I mean, there's already so much content here, it looks like, and we're talking about what is roughly half the game. Anyway, I already mentioned all the 6 classes that you got. all the skills you get with those classes. And then there's skill gems that any class can use that you can find when you loot. There's support gems that allow you to customize these skills, so you get to tailor your build that way. Of course, in an action RPG like this, they talk about gear a lot, so rarity tiers, but there's also effects on playstyle. Wolfheart did mention there was like an effect on his dodge, which I really like. That's a really random one because it reminds me a little bit of TMNT Splintered Fate, which I loved earlier this year. It's a roguelike game, and when you dodge around, you have like different types of dodges that'll leave like a trail of blaze behind you, or you'll be invincible for a little bit, or it'll trigger your projectile attack. So I like when basic mechanics in the game get reinvented by loot. I think that's going to be really good. And then there are subclasses in this game in the Ascendancy that's there. Plus, you can respec all of this. So if you're going through, you're not like a one play style, go back to another. And again, that combined with the overhaul to combat, which I think is the thing I'm most excited about, just sounds brilliant. But a lot of it does sound very like Path of Exile. Like, okay, yeah, big skill trees, lots of classes, crazy loadouts. Got it. Like, that's what I think this series is known for. But the visual upgrade, immense. The audio upgrade, immense. It's really the combat. Like I mentioned, it looks a bit slower, but in a good way, right? Because battles seem more deliberate. That's what I heard was the word for a lot of these previewers. Deliberate, right? You have these 2-weapon loadouts. It's dark and gritty. There's no difficulty options, at least according to that leaked review. There's less hordes, and a lot of people were dying, but they were like happily dying. That's because this game has attack patterns, which is pretty rare for this style of game. It doesn't sound like, again, it's about kiting your enemies, keeping them away in arm's distance, running away, and repeating your attack cycles over and over. A preview from Legendary Drops mentioned that there are second phases in these boss fights, one of them utilizing sound to help him lock in on the enemy's location. Plus, there's great controller support. So you're seeing a lot here where this is where the overhaul is coming in, right? Because it's different to have what you typically get in these action RPGs, which is your loot good, bro, type boss fights. They're kind of gear checks, where it's like, do you have enough good gear to get over this hump here? Otherwise, you're going to be just chipping away for a while. And they can still be engaging in their own way, but when you look at something like this, which mechanically speaking has you lock in on a different level, like you hear the boss, but you can't see the boss, and you have to locate them that way. That's very different for this genre, for sure. You combine that with different patterns that activate at different points in the boss's health bar. That's different for this genre. So it's a really big deal to see bosses, enemy types going in this direction, combined with a more deliberate combat system that rewards more skill rather than just sawing through hordes of enemies endlessly. And I do think there's a satisfaction in both. Again, growing up on like Dark Alliance and Champions Return to Arms and Norath, like I adored when I saw 40,000 enemies coming my way. I'm like, time to feel just how powerful I really am. You mow them all down. It's a great feeling. I think it'll always be a great feeling. But to see an action RPG kind of move in this direction when it's at a time where this genre does need a little bit of help, does need a little bit of a shot in the arm, according to many vets in that community, this feels like the perfect formula. And for someone like me who's been in and out, a little bit more casual, it looks like the hook I need to hang with one for a little bit longer than just the campaign. So let's talk a bit about that end game, because there's going to be a higher difficulty that's going to be added in when you run through the game a second time around. This is being removed after the game hits 1.0, so this seems to be like a bit of a stopgap, an offering to keep you around for a little bit longer. They talked about this Atlas map that has its own progression system. These are basically randomized zones on the map. You'll go into these areas, fight enemies. Sometimes they'll have enhanced versions of the campaign bosses, but you're going to move further away from the center of this map, and it's going to get progressively more difficult. Wolfheart talked about in his video how there are going to be dungeon challenges that give you special items or special challenges. So one of them he mentioned was like a no-hit dungeon. There was another that was mentioned during the game's live stream where you can get like jewels that slot into your passive tree. So yeah, there's a lot beyond the actual base game. There is an end game. If I were to look at it from everything I watched, everything I read from developers to previews and impressions, I do have a little bit of worry about the story, because a lot of people kind of mention in passing, like, of course it's great, but it seems like the presentation was doing a lot of the lifting. I have never really played an isometric action RPG game like this that made me go, man, that narrative is great. I would like to feel that way, but I've never been roped in. I think Diablo 4 got close, not in the terms of how good it was, but just getting me interested in the story by presentation alone. But then the narrative kind of fell short for me as time went on. But I was holding out hope that, okay, we're stepping in a direction where this is more of a focus in a prominent way without sacrificing what many people play and replay these games for. And so it seems like Path of Exile 2, people are saying, hey, the voice work is excellent. There is a real focus on the narrative, but many people didn't really talk about the why for that. So I want to experience that for myself. That's the problem I have with early access. That'd be, if you want to put it in quotes, worry number 2. You've heard my early access policy before. I'm a big dip my toe in the pool kind of guy. Even with a game that looks as good as this, I did the same with Baldur's Gate 3. It's like, okay, let's see what's going on here. This is fire. Great. See you at 1.0 because there's a lot to play right now. But early access for a game like this, right, where you know that it's the content's going to be mountainous, it makes a bit of a good argument to kind of hang around a little bit longer. Other concerns I have is a game like this is gaining hype. That's great to see. It's also an online game. So I think of server issues. Server issues and hype do not work well together. And I look at even smaller scale things, comparatively speaking, like a Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. I look at that and go, that was a really rough launch, and a lot of people are calling for that game to be like downloadable and stuff. And so I do wonder how, especially with this game dropping on a weekend, how this game will fare in its launch window. I hope the team is prepared and are getting the servers ready. I only say that because we don't want them to be caught flat-footed, and based on what I'm watching online, what I'm reading online, there is a lot of interest for Path of Exile 2. Of course, it's early access, so online games and bugs. That brings me a bit back to Elder Scrolls Online when it first launched, where I was like, I see the potential here, but my God, it's like every quest is failing here. So I'm hoping there's no massive bugs here. That's the understandable part about early access. We're kind of at that phase in the industry where like these early access games are coming out and they have more content than full priced games. I think of Hades 2 as well, where it's like, I may as well just treat myself to a little bit of luxury here, try it out at early access, and then come in for 1.0 and get the real prestigious treatment here. The other thing that I just wanted to keep in mind here is I don't think these action RPGs have really nailed down a good flow of exploration quite yet. It's always about the loot, and I would love to see, if I were to say take a page out of any book, a little bit of like what Stalker does or Fallout does, like series like that where you kind of wander into these buildings, you find interesting stories there, interesting characters there, you know, lore, things that build out the universe more. A lot of the side locations in these games are just like rehashes of dungeons you've been in previously. And as you can tell, like my thing is, will this game, as much as it's moving the gameplay forward, move some of the storytelling in this medium forward as well? I have my hopes, just again based on what little people have said about it, which is like, hey, it's presented really well. There's a lot of grit to this. It feels like there's a lot of maturity to this. That's the stuff that really excites me. But it's also about like executing and making sure like it's captivating in its own way, like interesting characters, a unique story, that sort of thing. So I'm holding out hope for that sort of stuff. But I do have, I guess, a few lingering concerns on like, will I be able to play the weekend it actually comes out? You know, that sort of thing that we'll be waiting on to learn day one. But when it comes to the visuals, I mean, that is just super impressive. The gameplay looks really good. And so I'm very excited to try this one out. Very excited to also try out Marvel Rivals. So this weekend will be a lot of fun trying out some new different games. There's also going to be Indiana Jones early access with the Great Circle. So it looks like there's going to be a lot of great stuff coming around for people to hop into whatever you're into. It looks like there's going to be something to take care of you there. So obviously keep an eye out for thoughts on all those games. But nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, those are just some quick thoughts on Path of Exile 2. I'm looking forward to hearing yours down below, so please do fire away. Other than that, please take excellent care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace. Yeah, I'm recording. You're so cute.